Thank you, Robin, Vicky and Marianne. I'll hand over to you and sit back and enjoy this session.
Thank you. Thanks. So yeah, welcome everyone. I'm Marianne Davies. I work as a senior coach developer at UK Coaching, and I'm also a PhD student at Sheffield Hallam University, and I coach and work in coach education and development. So I'm going to allow my presenters, I was going to say authors, they're co-authors. They're going to be doing most of the work and most of the talking. I'm just going to like top and tail it again. So I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves. So Robin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for finding the time. Hopefully you'll find it interesting. I am a senior lecturer in sport psychology at Liverpool Hope University, and equally excited and terrified at talking to all of you.
Hi everyone, I'm Vicky Gottwald. I'm a skill acquisition lecturer at Bangor University, and then I'm also a UKCC level 4 basketball coach.
Yeah, and I think before we start, actually, it's been we ended up doing this together because actually Vicky invited myself to join the two of you in writing a paper previously that Vicky led on around focus of attention, and one of the reasons was because we come from slightly different theoretical perspectives. So I think one of the really nice things about this is we've got different backgrounds, we've worked in completely different sports, and we also come from slightly different theoretical perspectives, but we're very passionate about how important it is to engage with people who maybe think differently and come from those different frameworks, and explore those points of difference and explore the things that also are the same and that are that we find commonality. So I think it feels important to say that at the beginning, that this is such a fun, it's been such a fun and such a great learning for me because of that. And that's something that is really, I wish we saw more of, instead of people digging heels in and having arguments about whose theory is right and wrong. So yeah. So thank you. And Vicky's in charge of the slides. So if you're good to go, Vicky. Yeah, so I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction, a background to it. Vicky's then going to walk you through some of the evidence-based research and what the science says. Robin, again, very much as we did in the chapter, will then sort of like do, okay, so what, how does this apply to practice? Sorry, and then I'm going to have a little look at, maybe what could you do as a coach to be more intentional in where you're supporting the focus of attention of the people that you work with.
Restart phone.
Yeah. So I guess it's always good to have a little bit of a recap on what we're actually talking about. So what is focus of attention and why it's important? Focus of attention is just the perceptual information that's being selectively attended to. What are we selectively attending to? And this includes visual, auditory, olfactory. I believe these are the old slides, actually, Vicky. I have done, never mind. So we've then got somaesthetic, which includes haptic, which is touch and feel, proprioceptive information, balance, and also pain, so nociceptive information. So we've got 4 then lots of information that we get from the body. And it's really important because moving skillfully involves perceiving as well as acting. We always move within an environment, and often with other people and other things moving in that environment as well. But at the very least, we're moving within an environment. And the research up until now has been very consistent in showing that an external focus of attention is more effective for performance. But what we find in practice, that most coaches are promoting an internal focus of attention. So we've got this really interesting split dichotomy there, that the bulk of the research is showing external is best. And what we've got in practice is most coaches using an internal focus of attention. Vicky, if this is the old slide, before we move on to that one, I'm just going to cover quickly a little bit more about the definitions. So an external focus of attention is a focus on the effects of our movements on the environment, and we've got different levels of it, which we'll get into. So it can be further away and it can be closer. So it can be distal and proximal. We've got an internal focus, like I say, would be on what our body is doing. The somaesthetic we've talked about, and then a holistic focus of attention, which I didn't mention in that first bit, is around the quality of a movement. So it could be, explosive or powerful. Sorry, Snoopy thinks that's exciting. So it's something about the quality of the movement as well. Now, when we first got together to write the chapter, I was trying to think of a narrative that would help frame it, something that would give it some context and help connect this academic topic to coaching and practice. And I had a story in mind that I started with, and then a couple of weeks later, I recorded a podcast with a friend of mine, Craig Morris, who's an Olympic slalom canoe coach. He's actually just retired, but he was still coaching at the time. And there was one section in the podcast that I thought, oh, he's really speaking to what this is about. And when I edited the podcast, I just thought this is perfect. This would be so good to put in here. And so I messaged him and said, can I please quote this whole piece of text at the beginning of our chapter? He's like, yeah, of course you can. So I wanted to say thank you to Craig. I'm going to just read this to you as well. This is it. In the book, it's a little bit longer. So what he said was, I've come to realize that we must be very careful about having too narrow or even any significant technical model. Because if you have it as a coach, you'll inevitably become an information constraint for the athlete, boundary on their attention, their interaction. So, for example, when paddling, the athletes are often evaluating their action against information I had predetermined for how something should look, rather than paying attention to and actually seeing and feeling the task relevant information in the environment. The information of what a wave is or not inviting them to do, or what the wind's effect is going to be on a pole means for action, thus restricting their ability to interact with these things more freely as they emerge. So effectively, I was overly constraining what information they picked up by guiding their attention to something that wasn't conducive with what I have come to view as a skilled performance. And the example he actually gave was when somebody went through a gate, and when they did the review with Craig, they said, as I was going through, I was thinking, you'll hate where I've got my hand. And he was like, oh, cool, to begin with. And then he was like, oh, hang on a minute. I don't want them thinking that. I want them paying attention to what they're doing as they're going through the gate, not thinking about what I've told them they should be doing. So that for me framed this really nicely. So I'd say thank you again to Craig for letting me use that. And yes, can you move over? Next slide, please, Vicky. I think I'm going to pass over to you. Yeah, so what does the science say about coaching instructions? And the myth that we're actually exploring here is that every instruction is a good instruction. Over to you, Vicky.
Well, thanks very much, Marianne. Sorry, I genuinely wasn't trying to sabotage you there. I think the slides just obviously haven't updated. Great. So I think we've got a bit of a mix of some practitioners in the webinar and some academics. So I'll try and keep things quite applied. I won't go too I'll talk about some of the theoretical principles, but I won't get too heavy into that. But given that we've got practitioners and academics on the webinar, hopefully everybody here this evening values or appreciates the value of evidence-based practice, or you probably wouldn't be here this evening on especially such a stunning day. So I've got the fun job of talking to you a bit about the knowledge base, what some of the science says, and really in terms of coaching instruction, in terms of the broader literature, I'm really only going to touch on a quite a relatively small area of the literature, and that's on how the coaching instructions that we give, so the language we use when we give instructions and feedback, how that influences where an athlete directs their attention, and ultimately the impact on their learning and performance for good and for bad. So have you seen my LinkedIn post? I've promised some poetry and I've promised some dad jokes. Robin's going to bring the dad jokes. I'm going to bring a little bit of poetry. God help you. So I've stolen this from a recent paper from Banks and colleagues, but it does a really nice job of just summing up what happens to the body if we focus attention suboptimally. So a centipede was happy quite until a toad in fun said, "Pray which leg moves after which?" This raised her doubts to such a pitch she fell exhausted in the ditch, not knowing how to run. And we see the same pattern of behaviour in humans when if you take a well-learned skill, if you start focusing on your movements, then we see that same sort of pattern of behaviour happen. So how does this relate to sport? What does this mean in sport? So if we take a golf putting, sports scientists love a golf putt. Take a golf putting example. If you provide instructions and feedback that direct an athlete's attention to their body, so it might be the grip, or it might be the pendulum motion of the arms, for example, on the putt, that would be what we classify as an internal focus of attention. So anything to do with the body, internal focus of attention, and then conversely, anything to do with the effects of our movements on the environment would be an external focus of attention. So in this case, it might be a coach giving some instructions that directs an athlete's attention towards the angle of the club head, or the motion of the trajectory of the ball towards the target, for example. That would be an external focus of attention. And then Gabby Wolf and colleagues have come up with this constrained action hypothesis, a very prominent theory in the literature that suggests if we focus on our movements, what happens is you tend to interfere with what's normally automatic response programming and disrupt performance. So if you think of a skill you do day to day, a skill you're an expert at, you do it without thinking about. If you, for example, running for a bus or walking down a flight of stairs, if you start thinking about the movement of your feet, you'll probably find that movement becomes quite awkward and constrained. So that's your constrained action hypothesis. And Gabby Wolf, it'd be sort of remiss not to mention Gabby. She's been a real sort of proponent of the science base. She's inspired a fair chunk of my career, and I'm sure has contributed to Robin and Marianne's interest in coaching instruction as well. And there's really, off the back of Gabby's work, there's a real sort of wealth of robust literature showing the benefits for an external focus of attention on lots of different performance outcomes. So focusing on the effects of our movements on the environment, even something as simple as a bicep curl, muscle efficiency is better when we focus externally compared to internally. I've just picked there on, I've just put on the slide a few examples of some of the meta-analyses and systematic reviews, just to get across that sort of sheer wealth of evidence for an external focus of attention. So regardless of which of those you look at, the message is really very black and white in the literature at the moment. It's sort of that leave the body out of it, and external focus is best. And there's a nice public significance statement from Chura and colleagues here. So they say, so meta-analyses show that the use of an external focus, so by directing attention to intended movement effects, provides advantages for performing and learning motor skills. These beneficial effects are present whether the individual is a child or an adult, has a clinical condition or not, and is considered to be a novice, experienced, or an expert at the motor skill. So again, it's this really sort of black and white message. And this evidence, we see this, it's not just in sport, we've seen evidence in the military, we see evidence in healthcare environments, in physiotherapy, in clinical environments, disability sport. That really sort of black and white message of an external focus is best. But what we would say is that when we reduce life to black and white, we never see the rainbows. So a large chunk of my research career today, I'm really interested in the anomalies, if you like. So is there a time and a place where directing attention towards the body might actually prove useful? And that's what some of the book chapter just sort of delves into a bit. So we know from the science base, from the broader science base in terms of sports science, that there probably is some instances where actually focusing on the body can be pretty useful. So things like process goals, external imagery, kinesthetic imagery, they're all promoting this sort of focus on the body, if you like. So it's a little bit out of sync with what constrained action hypothesis would suggest, which is really, really rigid as things stand. There's also a really nice Howie Carson, Dave Collins, they've got a nice 5A model of technical refinement. So sports psychologists working with athletes, trying to make technical refinements. They promote these sort of 5 phases of attention, if you like, and that second phase is a phase of awareness that they say is really important if you're trying to make technical refinements. And again, it's somewhat in line with constrained action hypothesis, because you can see on that graph there, you've got performance on the y-axis. There is a bit of a dip in terms of performance when we're adopting that sort of self-awareness. But the difference is this 5A model is really promoting the value and the importance of that self-focus, which isn't really taken into account with constrained action hypothesis. So a few years back, so it seems that there probably is a bit of a role of some sort of body consciousness for technique refinement. And a few years back, some of you might have come across, there was a really nice series of commentary articles in Psychology of Sport and Exercise, kicked off by John Toner, Aidan Moran. And they were making an argument for what they called a facilitative somesthetic awareness. So this was based on philosophical work of Schusterman long time ago, but they suggested that this body consciousness could be really useful when we're either refining skills or relearning skills for those instances. And this was around the same time that, or similar time that Tiger Woods was making some swing adjustments to his golf swing, and that also coincided with a bit of a performance slump. So that was around 2015. And what John Toner, Aidan Moran, what they argued was that was just a necessary part of technical refinement in the swing, and that Tiger Woods would then return to form. But Gabby Wolf argued that actually it was probably pretty unlikely that Woods would ever return to form, given that he had adopted or begun to adopt this sort of self-focus, if you like. But they were commentaries, and then there started to be some papers that have researched just a little bit further. So there's a nice paper by Izzy Moore. They've looked at the influence of internal and external focus of attention on gait retraining in runners. So basically working with runners, they talk about some of them needed to make a bit of a flatter foot contact. I assume that's to get a bit more power in the sprint. And what they show that actually using an internal focus of attention, a focus on the body, seemed to be optimal for performance when doing that gait retraining. So again, it's more evidence that there might be a time and a place to focus on the body. I also did some work as part of my PhD. We were looking at artistic floor gymnastics. So if you do a task or a sport where there isn't an obvious movement effect, there isn't an obvious external focus, you don't have a ball or a bat or a really clear target, we argued that actually maybe you don't get that benefit of an external focus in terms of enhancing automaticity, and that's what we saw in artistic gymnastics. Another argument, I suppose, to explain that finding could be based on what's called, if you haven't come across it, specificity of practice hypothesis. So that suggests that whenever you perform a movement or an action, then the source of afferent information, so the source of sensory information that's most useful to execute the task successfully, is prioritized for processing. So that's pretty logical. So, for example, if I do a backflip, for example, in gymnastics, then probably the most useful source of afferent information is probably proprioceptive information. Whereas if you do, for example, if you take a golf putt, probably the most useful source of sensory information is probably vision. And what we argue in this paper across 3 studies is that if the source of sensory information that's most useful for task execution is congruent with the type of focus of attention used, then performance will be better. So if we take that backflip in gymnastics, where I said proprioceptive is probably the most useful source of information. That's probably going to be more congruent with an internal focus, a focus on the body. Whereas if you take the golf putt, where visual information is going to be prioritized for processing, we would argue that that's more congruent with an external focus of attention. And this was part of Robin's PhD work. And we showed that over three studies, the benefits of an internal focus for these sort of proprioceptive based tasks. But they were all quite lab based tasks. And just to finish off with, there's a really nice study by Owen and colleagues. They do some qualitative research looking at golf, and they're looking at different components of golf. So is it putting? Is it a drive in golf? Is it during practice? Is it during competition? And what focus of attention is the coach prescribing, if you like, and what function does that play? And really what they show is this sort of, it's probably not so black and white as we think. There probably is a time and a place to focus on the body. And what they do in this research is it just reinforces, if you like, some of the complexities of applied practice and what happens when you go out and try and do some of this in practice. So that leads me nicely on to Robin. So I'll hand over to Robin.
Thank you very much. And all of this is really cool, but it introduces a huge problem where essentially now the question is, what should we do? The literature used to be really simple. Just slap an external focus of attention on any situation, be it if you want to aim better, apply an external focus of attention. If you need to be better in form sports and gymnastics, it's simple, apply an external focus of attention. Do you want to do anything in terms of movement, efficiency, power, strength, technique retraining? External focus of attention used to be your answer. But now the question is, if it isn't as black and white as we thought, what should we do? And it introduces a few complexities where we might need to instruct with intent. We might need to very carefully consider what it is we are instructing and some of the aspects and characteristics of those situations, as well as thinking very carefully, why are we actually instructing? What is our instruction meant to achieve? So I'll take us through that now, step by step. So firstly, and this is what aligns most closely with some of the more seminal and older literature, is performance in aiming tasks. Now, aiming tasks are quite nice because they are very much environmentally guided. We have an object we need to manipulate. That can be a basketball, it can be a football, it can be a dart, or maybe even some sort of shooting implement. And it is in the environment. It is not part necessarily fully of our body. And then we need to manipulate this object in some way to then interact with maybe a target in the environment, a hoop, a dartboard, etc. And all of this is very much in the environment. So in line with many of the both seminal and more recent literature and theoretical frameworks around focus of attention, indeed, an external focus of attention on the environment should and probably can produce the most effective planning and movement execution as well, and any adjustments that are needed as well, of those actions for peak performance in aiming tasks. So the net result quite consistently seems to be improved accuracy and efficiency, most likely because, like Vicky mentioned earlier, because of this congruence between the focus and the actual relevant source of information. But where it gets really interesting now, especially with this growing body of literature we've presented, is form tasks, for example. In these situations, the most relevant information is our body, because that's what we are quite often assessed on. So the quality of our movements and how accurately we produce certain shapes, the timings of those aspects and movements of our body, etc. Now, in those instances, there is a growing body of evidence to suggest that actually an internal focus can improve accuracy as well as efficiency by principally, similarly to the previous examples I gave about aiming tasks, principally the same thing happens here, where now, if we focus internally, our attention is congruent with the most relevant information and source of information, namely the body. However, if our aim is to perform better in terms of endurance, strength, or any sort of power tasks, they are again very much guided and relevant in terms of environment. So normally in any sort of endurance task, we want to travel through the environment. In a strength task or even power task, we might want to move something environmental through this environment. So again, by organizing and executing our movements while focusing externally should result in more relevant and congruent processing of afferent information to produce more congruent, efficient, and better outputs for those actions. So essentially, the efficiency gains an external focus of attention has been shown to facilitate quite often enables greater peak output. But there is an interesting special case, specifically if the aim is to bodybuild and then engage hypertrophy, for example. In those instances, we actually want to work our muscle more. We want to be potentially less efficient in order to produce essentially more wear, more waste product, and induce long-term hypertrophy and development. And in order to be less efficient in those situations, we might want to actually adopt an internal focus of attention. And what I find particularly awesome almost about this area is for years and years and years, bodybuilders have always said, feel the burn. Well, that's an internal focus of attention, really. So without almost knowing on a scientific basis, bodybuilders have gravitated towards the most optimal focus of attention for hypertrophy, feeling the burn, focusing internally on the movement of the limb and really feeling those kinesthetic aspects. I think it's pretty cool. And then this brings us lastly to perhaps one of the most complicated aspects in terms of the new nuances based on this more recent literature. Thinking about not just what type of instructions we give for what type of task, but also why it is we are instructing. So we might either instruct someone because we want them to make some sort of correction to their technique, or we might instruct them simply to achieve peak performance without necessarily needing them to change any aspect of their technique. So if the task is very much an externally guided task, for example, a free throw in basketball, the corrective information could be worded in an external manner. So for example, if we want the athlete to drive more through the legs, but we want to avoid an internal focus for that, we might want to stick to an external cue in order to facilitate that increased automaticity, accuracy, and so on, facilitated in those externally guided tasks and environmentally guided tasks like free throw in basketball. We might want to instruct the athlete to explode off the floor to generate power instead of adopting an internal focus, which might direct attention towards their feet. But here is where the nuance is, and which I think is quite an exciting applied implication. Long term, once we've created this change in technique through a mode of focus of attention, we might then want to gravitate back towards a usual focus of attention. So the usual focus of attention, when we don't have anything specific we want to correct in the athlete, might be focus on the arc trajectory of the ball into the hoop. So instructing through focus of attention essentially is more than just one instruction for all situations. It very much depends on what it is we're trying to achieve and why we are instructing. In the example I've just shown you, it was pretty straightforward. We would logically, based on much of the literature, adopt an external focus for this sort of aiming task. However, in the example I've given you previously, it was not very easy, but easier to create the corrective change and the technique change using an external cued type of instruction. However, sometimes there might be technical changes which cannot very easily be communicated through either an external or holistic focus of attention. So for example, if the athlete needs to change how exactly they manipulate the ball with the hands and use their fingers to control the ball instead of the palm, wording that in a purely external way is really difficult. So similarly to the sprint technique study Vicky has shown you earlier, a bunch of different studies suggest that a temporary switch to an internal focus of attention, and in line with the 5A model, potentially raising that awareness, an internal switch might be fine for a little bit, provided that long term our intention is to move back to the usual external focus for peak performance. So the take home message in terms of technique modification is, where possible, match the corrective instruction with, if it should normally be external, internal, or holistic. However, if it's not possible to match the corrective instruction with the external, internal, or holistic type that is normally most beneficial, try to gravitate back towards the usual focus once the corrective change in technique is beginning or has taken place, essentially. So, to summarize, we might want to consider, based on recent literature and this growing evidence base, more carefully, what is it we're trying to instruct? Is it a aiming task? Is it a form task? Is it something to produce greater power, strength, or endurance? Or is it that we actually want to produce some sort of change in technique? Is that why we are instructing? So those might be things we want to be even more mindful going forward and make our life more difficult instead of actually easier.
Oh, you're muted, Marianne.
That was always going to happen, wasn't it? I was thinking, keep Snoopy from interrupting both of you, and I forget to take mute off. Thank you very much. So just one last little bit from me. So I think in summary, yeah, we've gone from like, oh, that's great, it's just all external, and then oh, it's all external, and you just need to worry about whether it's going to be distal or proximal. So is it going to be close or is it going to be further away? And that Robin used that phrase, relevant information. If we're thinking from an ecological perspective, we might talk about specifying information, like where is the information that is actually important? Where is the source of information that the athlete needs for normal performance? Most of it, or a lot of it is external. I also think that perhaps that moves around. So for example, as you're doing certainly a sport that's got a lot of movement, a lot of information, that focus is likely to move around depending on what's happening. So yeah, sorry to make it all a lot more messy, but I think the take home message from that is, yeah, what is the intention of your practice session? So again, Robin talked about these different sports, and also maybe the level of ability of the performer, and also whether or not you're modifying a technique. And that we still, there's still an awful lot of the time it should be external. That's kind of like the main thing, but there are times when it doesn't need to be. So it's not so black and white. And I think the most important thing to do is to support yourself to become more aware of where you are guiding the focus of attention of the people you're working with. So again, going back to the story that Craig gave, because he was so focused on what he thought their perfect technique should be, they were going through gates thinking about where their hands were and whether or not he was going to be annoyed with them for them not being in the right place, rather than paying attention to the information that was actually specifying for them, like where the water is and the gate and what the wind was doing with the pole as they went through. So as a coach, you becoming more aware of how your language and your instructions and your feedback guide the attention of the people you're working with. And then I find it the hard bit is videoing yourself, audio recording a session, and then if you can do, and Amy, I'm sure, will have covered some of this stuff, audio record your session and do a little bit of think aloud in, which means that as well as giving instructions, you're also going to talk to yourself about what you're perceiving and why and what you're thinking, so that you can get more information, more understanding about where you are focusing your attention as a coach and the type of language that you're using and where that might be focusing the attention of your athletes. And I think as well as that being more intentional about language and more aware of the language that you're using, think about whether or not you need to give those instructions. Most coaches over instruct, certainly novices. More elite more elite coaches tend to be much better, much quieter, and when they say things, it's really amazing. So think about what information you do need to give. Sorry, Snoopy, you don't know anything about this. And think about other models you can use. So we've got constraints-led approach, and things like the SNAP model, which is I'm so sorry about my dog. Using space, manipulating things like space, time, environment, and people, so that some of the information that people get is from their environment rather from you talking to them. I'm just going to go and strangle my dog briefly, and I'm going to hand back to you, Amy.
Snoopy says that's enough.
That's just mum.
Just to finish there, it's interesting, like Marianne was saying there, she's got the message sort of less is more, and there's been a real shift in coaching over the last decade or so to take almost a bit of a hands-off approach, and stay quiet. But I think there's a bit of a lag in terms of a lot of the coach education and coach qualifications. When you're being assessed in your coaching, actually they don't always recognize the power of actually just standing back and not saying anything and just listening. But I'm hopeful that will get there eventually.
Yeah, thank you, Vicky. And I think also it's not about not saying anything either,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Vicky, is that your cat?
No.
No, if that was her cat, you wouldn't be able to see any eyes and ears. It is literally a ball of fluff.
Thanks, guys. I was gonna say, if you stop sharing there, we have got plenty of time for questions. I've got a couple I could kick us off with if no one's got any immediate.
You kick us off to get going, and then people
Yeah,
will get
thanks.
going, I think.
That was awesome. And we had a couple of weeks ago, Henrik who did a session on a bit along similar lines, to be fair. So, looking at like challenging Wolf's work and considering, internal is okay in certain situations. But I was curious around, do you think that some athletes can become accustomed to receiving certain types of feedback, and therefore, if we then try and change or direct attention in different ways, it could actually be detrimental?
Who's gonna?
Yeah, sure. I think back to like Sean Baylock's work with the self-consciousness
Yeah.
training, and that sort of paradox, if you like. I think that there's some work that has looked at preferences of focus of attention, but all the evidence so far suggests that actually what's more powerful than preference is the right focus of attention. But that said, Amy, I really don't think we've really scratched the surface in terms of the research. It's so lab based in an aim to be sort of very sort of internally valid, which I think is important at the start of a research journey. I think we've lost a bit of that sort of ecological validity. We're doing some work at the moment, myself and Robin, with a group at Edge Hill, where we're just reviewing all of the focus of attention instructions in the literature back from sort of 1998 through to 2023, and actually looking at the quality of the instructions. And actually it's really poor. And if there's if there's applied coaches in the room, and if you read some of the instructions, I mean, some of them are quite funny actually, they're so bad. But if you read some of the instructions that have been used in a lab-based environment to actually test some of these things, it's quite shocking, really. I think so I think there's certainly something to be said for that, Amy, in terms of what people are used to doing, and what works for them.
Yeah, and it's I guess it is difficult to study.
Yeah, we did a little. I tried a little bit of personality stuff in terms of self-consciousness in the lab. This was probably about a decade ago, and we didn't find anything. But again, it was a very sort of lab-based study with very sort of prescriptive instructions that I think there's so much more to be done working with athletes and talking to them about what works for them, and we're doing some stuff as well in terms of co-creating instructions with athletes in terms of what works for them and what's meaningful for them as well. And then I think we might, some of the more of those sort of nuances I think will probably come out.
Yeah, thanks. Right, I'm excited for that research.
Yeah, me too.
Cool. I think we've got Callum, Christy, and then Adriano. Callum, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, amazing. Thank you, Vicky. Amazing to see you again.
Nice to see you, Callum.
Yeah, no, cool. Love the presentation. Really appreciate it, guys. Thank you. Yeah, sort of applied hat on really. So I'm working with surgeons just now, surgeon trainers. And I'm just interested if you know of any research looking at, I'm not working on attention, focus of attention, you'll be pleased to know, on something slightly different. But yeah, I just wonder if you know of any research on how we train surgeons using different focus of attention. And then specifically, I'm doing a bit of work on the robotic assisted
Cool.
surgeon when they're in a console and that sort of thing. Do you know of
Oh,
any?
yeah,
Advice?
get in touch with me, Callum, separately. I'd love to chat more about that. So yeah, there is more clinical, there is some pockets of clinical work. It's more in terms of stroke, Parkinson's, things like that. I haven't come across anything specifically. There's more sort of contextual interference stuff in suturing, but I haven't come across anything specifically in terms of that. But I do teach it for my some of my some of my assignments in Skill Act. We have some intercalated medical students. So so we talk quite a lot about those sort of clinical environments. I think the message is, and that's, I suppose, that pressure situation where it is sort of life and death. It's so important that you've got that automaticity, if you like. And I think most of the time, an external focus of attention is probably going to be pretty critical there. But again,
Vicky,
there's probably more to do. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I don't know, and I'd have to dig it out, but I had read some stuff around from ecological psychology, looking at how surgeons practice, and certainly with the machine, so they can practice with, it's a machine that mimics the way flesh feels, which sounds a bit gross. But Callum, you might be more aware of these. I was like, no way. So they can, and the idea is they can feel what it feels like, and like what it feels like it was about to tear.
Yeah, that's true.
Actually, so they've got the visual stuff on the screen, but then the other source, you've got two sources of information. The other one is haptic. They're feeling pressure, and the pressure is being mimicked by the algorithm to feel like what the inside of a human body would feel like. So they know how much pressure they can put on something before, like would it rupture or would it tear? And it's almost like the springiness of it from a haptic perspective. I'll try and have a look at that for you, Callum. But yeah, great question. And what a really interesting thing where there are two different bits of information there, because you can see something, but actually you need to be able to feel it as well to know what you're doing. So yeah.
No,
I think that's
yeah, it's fascinating. I don't work when I'm in this space, but I think it'd be very much of interest though. I'm working with the trainers on Friday on sort of coaching and stuff, but yeah, I think this would be really relevant and of interest.
Robin, you look like you
I think
wanted to add something there.
If we quite rigorously apply some of the logic we've had in our book chapter, and to kind of like preface this answer, this hasn't been tested yet to my knowledge. So it's important, if anyone dies on the operating table, don't blame me. But I think if the task fundamentally involves feeling proprioceptively, if something through the machine feels like it's going to tear, then it would, to me, logically make sense to, in those specific cases, focus internally. Whereas if in other instances, the aim is to manipulate visual information, i.e. move certain organs out of the way or perform very precise cuts based on visual information. Essentially, that then becomes an aiming task, and in those specific situations, an external focus might be superior. So I think it really depends on the specific aim of any given moment almost during the operation, I think.
And I agree with that, Robin, but I think the fun bit is because the other element there is the pressure element. And there are some studies, Callum, that have looked at the benefits of an external focus of attention for preventing reinvestment conscious processing. So that's where that throws an extra sort of spanner in the works, because you've got the pressure element. Plus, if you do need to feel, that's where it comes to. We probably, like Robin says, we probably don't actually know the answer to that yet. But I think that would be a really interesting one to test. I think we could probably spend the whole we'll move on because we'll probably spend
Thank you,
the
guys. I don't want to take anymore. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Callum,
Cheers,
get in touch
Callum.
with Vicky and
Yeah.
you can do a research project together. Christy, welcome to you.
Awesome. There we go. Hi. Okay. So I am not an academic, so I apologize. But I do a lot of visualization work in point of attention. So this is amazing, by the way. And I work with a lot of individual athletes like British snowboarders, British ice dancers, etc. And to your point, you're so right in the fact of, yes, it needs to be internal, but there isn't that external point of focus. So in your research, did you find that when occasionally they do, where that focus would go, because there isn't a ball, there isn't a stick, like there isn't that like natural external place to put your attention? And sometimes when you're at like a performance where it's like the Europeans or World Championships, your focus externally goes to the crowd, which then is a huge distraction.
Yeah.
So what did you kind of find? I'm just so curious on what you were kind of seeing within that kind of realm. Sorry if that's super niche of a question.
No. So what we ended up using, and if you remember, they were well, not if you remember, but these were quite prescriptive instructions that we gave. It doesn't mean that they were right or good instructions, but so what we used for the external to basically manipulate an external focus of attention was to do with the movement pathway, and then the other thing was pressure exerted on the support surface. So that's what we used, and that's what the Gabby Wolf has got quite a good. There's quite a good table she's got in terms of like fundamental movement skills or fundamental movements, and just examples of sort of internal versus external in different situations. But this, as I suppose, the caveat of that is it was a very much sort of a lab-based study, whereas I think it would be interesting to talk to sort of expert gymnasts or dancers or whoever is in that space, and just talk to them. What do they where is their attention in that situation? Some of those things you just don't have time to even process sort of visual information, do you? And the other thing to say is, when I did my level 4 coaching, I always get so worried about talking to athletes too much about where they focus, just in case I cause a bit of a shift in attention to the body and a bit of a crash. It's a bit like the yips in golf, isn't it? So I'm always been a bit cautious with that with a coach, but I don't, I think in terms of sort of asking sort of open-ended conversations and knowing your athletes and what's going on during these movements, I think there's a lot more to be done in that space. I don't know if that helps at all, Christy.
helps a great amount. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd be really interested in whether or not some of the focus is on where they want to end up in the, because they've still obviously got
Yeah.
gravity and ground and an environment, and I know proprioception is around their space within the shapes they're making, but they're still doing it within an environment that's actually quite important. They need, if they're doing tumbles and a gymnast, they
Yeah.
need to end up in somewhere on a map, not just like randomly anywhere.
Yeah,
So
it's like Billy
Yeah.
Elliot. You know that scene in Billy Elliot where he's spinning in the bathtub and finishes with the mirror. It just reminds me of that.
Thanks,
Yeah, and
Chris.
some of the conditions
Thanks,
like
good question.
actually change, like the environment versus like snowboarders, the snow can melt or it can get more icy. Whereas figure
Yeah,
skating, it's very contained, and so you kind of know what to expect.
And they
Yeah,
need to be
yeah.
able to interact with that on landing, don't they? So they can't
Yes.
ignore. There is still an environment, and unfortunately, gravity, as much as it sucks, is still there. So
Yeah,
Thank you guys.
yeah. Bro, thanks, Crystal.
Hopefully we'll get through the last two questions. If people do
Yeah.
have to leave, completely understand, but we'll try and get through the last two. If you guys are all right to stay
Yeah,
on.
yeah, we're good.
Right. Adriana, would you like to ask your question?
Oh yeah. I found all of this fascinating probably for two things. Probably I'm on my start of being a sports psychologist, so my SIPA journey, but also I'm a coach of two sports. So I coach like volleyball and beach volleyball. And I'm a huge fan of either constraint approach or ecological. I love both. But what I don't understand through what are we going on today, for me, practically, which probably clashes with your ecological validity, as you said, was more like I'm having an athlete, for example, who never played volleyball or beach volleyball. So to me, I have to teach the correct movement, for example, and therefore I need to point internally, this is what you should do with your body to do that skill. And then after he mastered that, then I can focus externally. But I don't see how he can improve his performance if before hasn't mastered internally, if that makes sense.
So I had the same struggle as a coach, if I'm perfectly honest. Now the Gabby Wolf argument is that we just need to be more innovative as coaches, and there are some tools to do that. For example, one of the things Marianne had on her slides that maybe we didn't have time to get into depth with is analogy learning. Actually, Marianne, you gave a really good analogy yesterday when we were chatting. I just can't remember even what sport it was in. What was that in?
I have no idea. I can't.
Okay.
remember.
Yeah, analogy. All I can think of is the cookie jar in basketball.
Yeah.
Put the lid on the cookie jar, but I'm sure there's better ones than that. But analogy learning is a good way to do that. Also, constraints is a good way to do that. You're putting, environmental or task constraints or individual constraints in place to achieve what you want.
Yeah.
And it does encourage a bit of that external focus. So without them, avoiding them focusing on the body. And because I think the problem is if you when you're learning a skill, if you gain too much explicit movement centered information, if you're coaching very sort of prescriptively and, your feet needs to be shoulder width apart, this needs to happen, then it's not good for when we're under pressure as well. So it's not just the sort of focus of attention phenomenon, but when we're under pressure, we can then sort of reinvest that information. So I think there's a bit of a balance to be struck there. I think it's, from my perspective, it's impossible to never mention the body, and I'm not sure that's the right way to go. But I think there is some sort of middle ground there, and it's just trying to be sort of creative with those analogies we use, and then also I think there's for me there's like core negotiables in I come at this from a cognitive point of view, so I do coach towards a bit of a technical model, but it's a flexible and adaptable technical model, and there's some non-negotiables for me. So for example, in basketball, snapping the wrist right through and extending the elbow right through, they're sort of non-negotiables for me. So I sort of do have to sort of talk about those, but there's other things where I can sort of use a bit more analogies or external.
Yeah. I love all of this, and coming towards my side, I guess, because I was saying, how the hell can I do all external if this need to be done? So it was a bit hard. And at the same
Yeah.
time, sorry, first of all, at the same time, there is a huge kind of like research on movement analysis and people that analyze every single athlete in their sport to see this is the optimal movement, therefore this is what they
Yeah,
should be doing
exactly.
to. And so in my mind, I was like, okay, if there is all this
Yeah.
research telling us this is all you should be doing, but then
Yeah.
that doesn't actually help performance, how that works. Like,
Exactly. And is there, is there a perfect, there's, I think we know now that there's not a perfect technical model for, for anything. And there's a lot of individual differences in terms of people's own mechanics and sport is so dynamic and changing that, and Mary, this is Marianne's bread and butter. I'll let you jump in, but there probably isn't a perfect technical model. But the other thing to say, Adriano, is to go and try things as a coach and not be afraid of trying things and seeing what works and what doesn't with your athletes and what they like and what they don't. Marianne, I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, I was actually just going to imagine to that finding somewhere in your coaching where you can explore a little bit, and I think that's the hard bit, not trying to sort of change loads at the same time, but just to find somewhere in your coaching that you can have a go at something and maybe just do like, this is a, for this bit of the session or a warm up, we're going to do something different. So look at your coaching, maybe different times a year where you can be a bit more explorative. I mean, Fabianossi talked about that. By the way, Liverpool won. Now I'm thinking he's not going to be able to come do any stuff with us because he's so busy, but that was amazing. Yes, he's the head goalkeeper coach now, but he's talk about, like after a competition in the first bit, you can be more creative and do more stuff, but clearly not as you get closer to a competition.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different things that you're going to build into this when you think about practical application. And as Vicky said, that I think more and more we see that this idea that there's one optimal movement that absolutely everybody should be doing doesn't really hold up. There are non-negotiables, like I say, but like that are that you need for certain bits, but they're usually things like around a point of power or a landing or a takeoff, or they're like moments in time, and the bits around those might be much more adaptable. And even things like being tired is going to make you move differently. So as human beings, we get tired just throughout a game, then we can start the optimal movement then might be different. And our bodies they kind of go for not to an optimization, but for an adaptability to over a longer period of time. So yeah.
Thanks, guys. And Raf, I'm sorry that we've just come to you now, but we'll let you ask your question.
Yeah, I'll be very, very quickly. It's basically just so I'm not academic either. I'm just
Hi,
like
Raf.
I'm just an enthusiastic coach that follows Marianne because everything that she says. Yeah. So I'm just trying to get what you guys say, and I try to experiment. Like I'm a hobbyist coach. I'm a paramedic as professional, but then I try to like study and break down stuff and read it. So I just wanted my experience today is really based on what your paper is. So I teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and in the same room today I had 2 pro fighters, and a like professional rugby player, and then 2 total beginners. So I was using we're working on force vectors. So basically how you apply pressure to break down your frames so you can smash the person on the ground. So I create a challenge that you develop. First of all, you just have to put your chest on the arm and let you feel just the vector going in one direction. The second round, you're changing the vector, so you're applying different. And in the third round, you can use your limbs. So by constraining them until we get to the limbs, you could see the difference and how they clicked. But at the end of every challenge, I create a little reflection time. So I basically ask 3 questions. So the first question I call internal proximal. So what helped you anticipate pressure shifts? So for them to think now, to reflect what you've just done it. And then some of them froze because the first time they having a lesson from me. So the guys that have been working with me throughout last year, they all understand these questions are going to come at the end. So when I'm giving you the challenge, you pay attention to what the question is asking you, because I'm going to repeat the same question at the end. And if you didn't answer, we're going to create another challenge until you get it. So the second question said, how did your elbows and hips move to stabilize you? So as they move, you're feeling the vector, but now the change in direction, you're feeling with it. And the third question was external. So what patterns in your opponent's movement gave away pressure shifts? So now we're observing, like through the haptic feedback, how they were moving. So I just like during the game, like I don't like to say game, I like to say challenge now. So during the challenge, I was trying to correct a real beginner one, and I had to use dynamic feedback. I had to use internal and external to try to help her like move, by the way she wouldn't get it. But then she clicked, and that is just like you know what you guys said about the dynamic feedback. I think for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because it's so engaging that you have to use it. Like, you know, there's no way we cannot use it. But I just want to go through you to say, you know, if what I'm doing is correct or it sounds like I'm going the right way. But I just want feedback to you because through your paper, you know, using the constant, I think it was dynamic feedback is the word. I don't know if it was dynamic feed or the circle.
Yeah.
Is that the correct term? Like the dynamic
Oh
feedback?
yeah, the model. Yeah. It's really, I'm gonna let Vicky answer in a minute, but I think what's really interesting there is, again, it's one of the things I've only done one session, by the way, and that was with Callum that you came to. But one of the bits that again is internal is a sense of balance. So some of the feedback is whether or not the opponent is pushing you off balance, isn't it? Because the key bit is to not get pushed off balance. So again, you've got this really specific feedback. You've got haptic because you can't see them because you're generally so close, can you? And the other one is balance, and I guess pain as well if they're going to be knocking on the floor. But you've got all of this really important information that actually is internal. So yeah, fascinating. Go, Vicky.
Yeah, just want to feel trying to apply what you guys are saying. So I'm listening.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I was just really impressed how you managed to get force vectors and body slammed into the same sentence. But yeah, no, it sounds good to me. And the good thing to me is that you've just got that self-awareness in your coaching, and that you are actually evaluating what you're doing, and it's about talking to your athletes and getting to know them as well. So I think that sounds really interesting. It's a lot, as a coach, doesn't matter how many years we've been coaching, we're always still learning, aren't we? And trying different things.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Raf, thanks for kind of bringing the session to life and showing us how this work is applied to your coaching.
Well, thank you for your work. It really helps the coaches.
Thanks, Raf.
Okay, so that brings us to a close. Huge thank you, Robin, Vicky, and Marianne. Really awesome session. I'm sure plenty of people will reach out. I hope that's okay. You've already got one new project. I'm gonna
No, yeah.
And just before everyone heads off, next month we've got Dr. Phil Kearney talking about distinguishing the truths from the myth and the dual axis framework. So please look out for the link and the Eventbrite link to that, and have a lovely evening, everyone.
Thanks very much, Amy.